S-276.
Senator Kutcher.
Honourable Senators, I move that this bill be read a second time.
It is moved by the Honourable Senator Kutcher, seconded by the Honourable Senator Beam, that this bill be read a second time. On debate, Senator Kutcher.
Thank you, Speaker. Senators, I rise today to speak to Bill S-276, an act respecting Ukrainian Heritage Month. When passed, it will designate September of every year as Ukrainian Heritage Month across Canada, a time to celebrate from coast to coast to coast the contributions Ukrainian Canadians have made to the tapestry of our country. We all know what the word heritage means, but it is worthwhile to take a moment and consider its importance. Our heritage is what we have inherited from the past, those things that we value and enjoy in the present, and that which we strive to preserve and pass on to future generations. It's a mixture of things, ideas, memories, and hopes. It is something that each of us, as a member of this Canadian society, brings to the tapestry that is our place. It is something that each of us uses to understand and respect ourselves, to share that understanding with others, and to help us better understand and respect our fellow travelers through sharing and discovering their heritage. In short, our heritage is a celebration of who we are, who we aspire to be, and part of the glue that binds us to each other. I'm bringing forward this bill to honor my Ukrainian heritage with the support and encouragement of the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress, Ukrainian diaspora, recently arrived Ukrainians seeking refuge here, and MP Yvonne Baker, who has brought forward similar legislation in the other place. As I do this, I want to confirm to all who are listening that I also take this time to acknowledge that I respect and want to learn more about your heritage. For in that mutual journey of discovery, we can hope to better understand each other, and by so doing, define and reach for a better common tomorrow. I'm privileged to stand here in this chamber and to share with you the story of my parents and grandparents. They came to this country from Ukraine, having lost all their property, many of their friends, and most members of their own families to Russian and Nazi forces that sought to destroy them, their identity, and their futures. They were amongst numerous Ukrainians who sought refuge in Canada following World War II and found a safe landing for their families so that they could live in peace without fear and flourish for generations to come. Once here, they became part of a much larger and established Ukrainian diaspora that traces its calls to the call for, quote, men in sheepskin coats, end quote, issued by Clifford Sifton, Minister of Interior, who chose to welcome Eastern European farmers to Canada as an immigration strategy to settle the West between 1896 and 1902. His remembered phrase stating what he believed Canada needed to settle the prairies was, quote, a stalwart peasant in a sheepskin coat, born on the soil, whose forefathers have been farmers for 10 generations, end of quote. Thousands living in what is now Western Canada answered this call, and by their sweat and toil, helped turn Canada into the agricultural powerhouse that it is today. Indeed, some members of this chamber can trace their family stories back to this time. The bond between Canada and Ukraine has been forged over many decades and is still being molded. However, since February 2022, all Canadians have become keenly aware of these bonds between Canada and Ukraine. Russia's genocidal and illegal war on Ukraine has reminded us of the historic tragedies that we hoped were long gone, but are now re-emerging. This invasion not only threatened to destroy Ukraine, but is also an attack on the shared values that bind us together, values such as human rights, democracy, and the international rule of law. Although I anguished with the loss of my mother, who died with COVID in a nursing home during the height of the pandemic, I am in some way thankful that she passed before that Russian invasion. I could not imagine how horrible it would have been for her at her advanced age to relive the traumas of her childhood and the memories of how those family members who survived the war suffered horribly under Stalin and subsequent Russian dictators. This history is part of the heritage that defines Ukrainian Canadians and which binds them to others living in this country whose heritage also includes similar memories. It is a history with deep and tragic roots, including about 4 million deaths during Holodomor, the Stalin-imposed famine, and between 8 and 14 million killed in World War II. As our previous colleague, Senator Paul Yutsik, stated in his 1964 speech in this chamber, quote, "It is the living human spirit of truth, justice, and liberty which ultimately must prevail for Ukraine and all oppressed peoples who are still struggling for their freedom against Russian communist imperialism. The free countries of the world, including Canada, must mobilize world opinion against the largest existing totalitarian empire," end of quote. Friends, sadly, this challenge still confronts us today. There are now more than 1.3 million people of Ukrainian heritage living in Canada, close to about 4% of our population. My family is counted amongst those, beginning with my grandparents, parents, myself, my 2 brothers, and then our children and grandchildren. As a boy, I didn't speak English until I started elementary school. As was the case in many refugee homes, the mother tongue was the language of the household. For us, it was Ukrainian. Since my grandparents never really learned to speak English, that was the language that bound me to them. The years passed, and due to family circumstances and economic realities, I became more and more removed from my language of origin. My familiarity with my language and culture was nourished by my Baba and Jido, grandmother and grandfather. Unfortunately, after they died, I stopped speaking Ukrainian. I had nobody in my life that I needed to use my mother tongue with anymore. Since the genocidal Russian war on Ukraine began and Canada started to welcome displaced Ukrainians, I have been privileged to meet many people from my homeland, again seeking refuge on our shores. I have come to know a number of these recent arrivals, and these events have encouraged me to renew my cultural ties, and hence, that's why I'm bringing forward this bill. It has also been an opportunity to reconnect with my mother tongue. It's provided me with a renewed appreciation of my roots and has rekindled an interest in understanding more about the contributions that Ukrainians have made to the history and fabric of Canada. In fact, colleagues, I've been taking Ukrainian lessons from a young professional who herself and her family is making a difference through their work and community involvement since arriving in Canada. I am improving with every lesson and soon hope to be able to speak Ukrainian at the age of 71, almost as well as I spoke it when I was 6. Part of what I hope to accomplish by bringing this bill to our chamber is to encourage all of us to learn more about our heritage, as I have been learning about mine, and to use that journey to help us better know ourselves and better understand each other. September is a notable month for Canadians of Ukrainian heritage, as it was in September over 125 years ago that it is believed that the first Ukrainian immigrants arrived in Canada. This was during the time, as I have earlier mentioned, when Canada was promoting immigration of farmers from Eastern Europe to settle the West. Ivan Plivkiv and Vasil Ilyanik arrived in Canada on September 7th, 1891. This day is marked in Alberta, Manitoba, and Ontario as Ukrainian Heritage Day. Marking the month of September nationally would include these days, while concurrently allowing for celebrations to occur from coast to coast to coast at times that would serve the needs of various communities. Many of these early arrivals settled in the prairie provinces and farmed before moving to urban settings and taking on other jobs. Many served in our armed forces in both world wars, and like so many other ethnocultural groups in this country, they paid for their place in Canada with their blood. There are also many stories of these early Ukrainian prairie settlers being helped by their indigenous neighbors. Indeed, these bonds between Indigenous and Ukrainian communities is symbolized by the kokum scarf. And I, as many of you in this chamber have noticed, some of our colleagues have been wearing this symbol of appreciation and mutual respect. We are fortunate in Canada to be part of a tapestry that was woven by hands of many colors. The important contributions made by Ukrainian Canadians throughout our history and in our present have helped form this country that we live in today. This bill is an opportunity to recognize that heritage and celebrate the impactful role that Ukrainian Canadians have made to our social, economic, political, and cultural fabric. It would also provide opportunities for learning and education on the shared values of rule-based governance and democracy that are the foundation of Canada's support for Ukraine during this challenging time. There are countless Canadians of Ukrainian heritage who have made contributions to our country in fields of science, the arts, the armed forces, athletics, business, and politics. They have played a part in weaving the tapestry of the Canada of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I will take a moment to highlight only a few here. Individuals such as Roberta Bondar, the first Canadian woman and second Canadian in space, a neurologist who is a pioneer in space medicine research. She's also an accomplished nature photographer. Dr. Bondar is a role model to many who dream big. Sylvia Fedorik was another medical pioneer who worked as a medical physicist in the area of the uses of radioactive isotopes in cancer treatment. She was a professor who became the first woman named chancellor of the University of Saskatchewan in 1986. Fedorik also excelled at baseball, track, and curling. She's an inductee into Canada's Curling Hall of Fame and was the president of the Canadian Ladies Curling Association. Maybe Senator Plett's granddaughter will one day be in that same position. This trailblazer accomplished many firsts over her lifetime, including becoming the first female lieutenant governor of Saskatchewan in 1988. She wove many threads into the fabric of our country's history. Raina Tishin was also from Saskatchewan. His father was Canada's first Ukrainian-born senator, and Ray served as a member of the House of Commons from 1974 until 1988 and served in the cabinets of both Joe Clark and Brian Mulroney. On January 29, 1990, he was sworn into office as Canada's Governor-General, where he transformed that office into one that celebrated his phrase, and I quote, "The Governor-General belongs to the people of Canada," end quote. For decades, Canadian households turned in to test their knowledge with Jeopardy host Alex Trebek. Trebek, whose father came to Canada as a boy from Ukraine, worked at the CBC before taking up the helm of Jeopardy. Playwright and novelist George Riga tells us about the Canadian experience in his writing. Raised in a northern Alberta farming community, he rose to prominence despite little formal education. The Ecstasy of Rita Joe and Other Plays is his depiction of the plight of Indigenous peoples struggling to be heard. Musicians from all genres draw from their Ukrainian heritage, such as Randy Bachman, Paul Brandt, Chantal Krevozyuk, Luba and Ivan, and Stefan Doroschuk from Men Without Hats. I know my seatmate will know all about that. There are countless athletes of Ukrainian descent that have represented Canada, especially NHL hockey players, including Wayne Gretzky, and my own cousin, Mark Osborne. Mark is much less well known than Mr. Gretzky, and sadly, he spent more than a decade and a half playing for the Maple Leafs. What can you do? You should have been like an Canadien. Senators, this chamber has several current members of Ukrainian descent, and there have been many before us. I remember making this connection with Senator Andrzejczyk before her retirement. One such distinguished senator was Paul Yutzik, who was a leader within the Canadian-Ukrainian community and has been called the father of multiculturalism. He set the stage for a shift in the underlying ethnocultural values of the Canada we see today. His first speech in the Red Chamber was centered around the concept of multiculturalism. He insisted that all ethnic groups deserve to be recognized as partners in a Canadian mosaic. In his March 3, 1964 speech titled Canada, a Multicultural Nation, he pointed out that Indigenous peoples were in Canada long before the coming of French and English settlers. He saw our multicultural reality as, quote, unity in our diversity, end quote, and challenged our nation to embrace and celebrate that reality. In that speech, he pointed out this journey, if successful, would benefit not only Canada, but the world community as well. He said, and I quote, "If we succeed to evolve the pattern of unity and continuing diversity, this will serve as a precedent, a model for other states in the world. It will be Canada's contribution to the world," end quote. I hope that all of us in this chamber recognize the value of unity in our diversity. Our task is to better learn how we can harness the good in the ties that bind us, while avoiding the incitements of those who would use our diversity as an excuse to rend us asunder. The Vyshyvanka is a symbol of that call for understanding, respect, and a willingness to work together for the common good. Traditionally, the Vyshyvanka is a handmade blouse, sewn of natural materials and embroidered with threads of various colors. Ukrainians believe embroidery has a talismanic meaning, the power to protect a person from harm and to bring good luck. The Vyshyvanka is a symbol of the beauty that is created when threads of many colors are woven together. It's a symbol of how every one of us can link with others to create something much greater than the sum of our parts. Senators, we are living in a time that calls for more celebration of the things that bind us together in the face of the things that pull us apart. This is why I'm seeking your support to move this bill celebrating Ukrainian heritage quickly through this chamber and over to the other place. Dziękuję, thank you, merci, and Eladio.
Senator Plitt, you have a question? Then Senator
Well, I do
Cardozo.
not. I have a short little statement before I want to take the adjournment. But if Senator Cardozo has a question, I will yield to him first.
Okay. Senator Cardozo.
I have a question. Thank you very much, Senator Kutcher, for that speech and for introducing this bill. I happen to think that Heritage Months dedicated to various communities are extremely important because they really place the community in Canada as opposed to simply looking at, for example, national days of other countries. As you've outlined in brief, because you could have spoken for hours about the contributions of the Ukrainian Canadian community, there has been significant contribution, and certainly the contribution of our late colleague, Senator Paul Yuzik, in terms of multiculturalism back in '64 was an important one in terms of developing what was then the multiculturalism policy introduced in 1971 and the Act in 1988, I think it was. I think during the years, I'm getting my question real quick. During the years of Soviet domination of Ukraine, I think it's fair to say that Ukrainian language and culture was more alive, well protected, and growing in Canada than it was in Ukraine. And here we are in another situation where there is another attempt by Russia to stamp out Ukrainian culture and language and people. Are we back into that space? Is there a similarity, and a sad similarity to that period? And how do you see the role of Ukrainian Canadians, not only in that situation, but reminding us of our role as citizens of the world, understanding the various cultures? Thank you.
Senator Kutcher.
Thank you very much for that, Senator. I think one of the most important things about cultural appreciation is that as we learn to appreciate our own heritage, we have the opportunity to equally appreciate everybody else's heritage. And I think that that is one of the gifts, as Senator Yusuk pointed out, that Canada can give the world. We are all too aware of different places in the world, and indeed in our own history, where we have stamped out vigorously the culture of others, where we have not treated other people with respect and dignity, where we have othered them, discounted their humanity, discounted their language, discounted their identity. We're better than that. We can't avoid that we've had that history in Canada, and we can't avoid that that history happens over and over again in the world. But we can say that we can learn from those terrible atrocities, the difficulties of the past, and that we have a responsibility here in our own country to bring healing to the damage that we have caused, but also, as you well point out, to stand up for other countries who are faced with similar circumstances. Thank you for your question.
Senator MacDonald, then Senator Cormier. Senator MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That was a great speech. I really enjoyed it. I do want to make maybe a clarification for the chamber. You talk about how identity can be dismissed. You mentioned that both the French and the English, but you probably should have said the French and the British, because although the English are British, the British aren't necessarily English. The British are a multicultural people. That's true. And you talk about, I know because most of my ancestors are British, but very few of them are English. And as you talk about the eradication of culture and language, Cape Breton is full of the eradication of both. My grandparents are all fluent Gaelic speakers. It was the third most common language in the European language in this country. In fact, it was the third most common language in the country at the time of Confederation. And in Cape Breton, my father and all of my grandparents had their language suppressed. One of the most remarkable things about it, though, in school was that usually the person doing the suppression spoke the language themselves. So it's a strange dichotomy, but I just wanted to put that on the record. Do you agree?
Senator Kutcher.
Thank you for that question, Senator Senator MacDonald. I think you very poignantly pointed out to us how important this is, and I thank you for doing that. Senator Cordy and I had the privilege of being at Celtic Colours, at the opening of Celtic Colours just last week. And it is amazing, and it's joyous to see the revival of the Gaelic culture and the incredible richness that culture brings to all of us. And it's with great disappointment that we look at what we lost, because just think of what we could be had we not lost it. But now we have to get it back. So thank you.
Senator Cormier.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Alors, merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Senator Kutcher, for your eloquent speech on the importance of culture. Ukrainian culture, of course, but culture in general. Before asking my question, I'll say that I had the great privilege of welcoming in my Francophone region a group of Ukrainians. And through music and concerts, we managed to bring the two communities together, my community, New Brunswick, and these newcomers, the Ukrainians. So my question, we know culture is a provincial jurisdiction, but would it not be interesting to have more programs federally to help the different cultures to meet? It's through such meetings that our country grows stronger culturally. Are you interested in that idea?
Senator Kutcher, réponse.
Thank you very much for your question, Senator Cormier, and also for your leadership in improving the culture and the Franco-Canadian culture, the Acadian culture, and all. It's just so important. And thank you for that, and also for your own culture, your own musical talents, which we wish we heard more of. When I first learned to play a harmonica, the first song I played, and it just came out of nowhere with the Kolomeyka, which is a Ukrainian dance, by the way. I completely agree with you. I frankly would like to see much more federal investment in everything that we can do to help us better understand each other. And I think that it must begin with our young people. I would like to see investment in Canada so that our young people can go from coast to coast to coast to live and experience culture and community from people who are not like the people that live down the street from us, but people who we need to get to know better. I think we would have a lot fewer conflicts in this country amongst ourselves, this internecine warfare, which is not necessary, if we had the opportunity to spend more time living and learning with each other. Thank you.
Senator Dasko.
Madam Chair, thank you very much, Senator Kutcher, for your wonderful comments. And of course, I share your Ukrainian heritage, and I very much value what you have said today, especially your emphasis on the positive. And of course, we are now in a terrible situation facing Ukraine, which both of us spoke last night to Senator Omidvar's bill with respect to seizure of Russian assets. And I appreciate your mention of the Holodomor, which is another example of Soviet terror on Ukraine. And so this is supposed to be a question, so I'll ask it this way. One of the places that I find tremendously inspiring is the Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg, which is that's my hometown. And as a question and there is a wonderful exhibit there about the Holodomor as well as the Holocaust and many other stories of terror. Would you encourage all of our colleagues to visit the Human Rights Museum in my hometown of Winnipeg? Thank you.
Senator Kutcher.
Thank you very much for that question, Senator Dasko. Of course I'm going to say yes, but I want to put a caveat in here while everyone's listening. I would expect that you would arrange for a wonderful meal of varenika and holubchi and everything else, which would make it much better for us to visit. And definitely the music. So thank you for that suggestion, and thank you for offering your hospitality.
On debate, Senator Platt.
Well, I'll start. But first of all, let me echo Senator Dasko's invitation. And although it may be her hometown, she fled Winnipeg. I'm not sure why. I'm still there, but I would also encourage you to come and visit the wonderful Human Rights Museum. Thank you, Senator Kutcher, for your speech. I agree with all aspects of it. I'm not Ukrainian, I'm Mennonite. But of course, the Mennonites, after they left Holland, they went to Poland, they fled communism there and went to Ukraine. And many of them suffered and died during the Holodomor as well. Of course, many similarities between Mennonites and Ukrainians, certainly Varenika being one of them. But Senator Kutcher, thank you. I do want to speak to this. I appreciate what you have said. And Madam Speaker, with that in mind, I will prepare my notes, and I would like to adjourn for the balance of my time.
It is moved by the Honourable Senator Platt, seconded by the Honourable Seidman, that further debate be adjourned until the next sitting for the rest of his time. Is it your pleasure, Honourable Senators, to adopt the motion? Carried.